podcast divorce. Don't let it happen to you. Hello and welcome to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and we are diving into that topic today. That's right, podcast prenups. As intriguing as it sounds, it is really crucial. Yes, you heard that right. Just like in a marriage, your podcast partnership needs clarity and agreement on the big what-ifs. Imagine starting a podcast being like building a house with your best friends. A podcast prenup is the foundation that keeps it standing strong no matter the weather. So buckle up as we explore why these agreements are essential and how you can draft one that fits your podcast perfectly. So first off, what exactly is a podcast prenup? Well, it's a formal document that outlines how you and your co-hosts are going to handle everything from ownership stakes to what happens if someone decides to leave the show. Think of it as a blueprint or a roadmap. Just like you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, you shouldn't build a podcast without a prenup. It's not just about ending things. This is about setting up from day one with clear rules for operation and collaboration. Now imagine a scenario where a couple of friends, let's call them Alice and Bob, start a podcast together. Initially, they're just thrilled. They're sharing their passion for cooking with the world. As their podcast grows more popular, real money starts coming in from sponsorships and other sources. And without a clear agreement, Alice, who does most of the editing and scheduling, feels that she deserves a larger cut of the profits, while Bob, who initially invested in the equipment and is doing some of the production work, disagrees. Well, this is where the podcast prenup could have laid out all these kinds of details beforehand and prevented some of the conflict. Now, why would you need something like this? Well, podcasts are kind of unique creations. They often start as passion projects between friends and colleagues, and then they grow into what can become significant business ventures. And without that clear agreement from the start, disputes over money, roles, and responsibilities can quickly escalate. A podcast prenup is what keeps everyone's expectations aligned and provides a clear path for resolution when conflicts inevitably arise. So let's say you and your co-hosts are sailing along on a peaceful sea when suddenly a storm hits and that podcast suddenly scales up, personal disagreements emerge. If you don't have a lifeboat in the form of a podcast prenup, your podcast could sink under the pressure. And with one, though, you navigate the storm, keep your podcast afloat, and you keep moving forward. So let's delve into the specifics of what a podcast has as its sort of key components. A solid prenup should cover a few things. Ownership, first of all, who owns and what percentages of the podcast. This isn't just about who speaks more on the mic or who puts in the money or about whatever, but also everybody's contributions behind the scenes and so on, and really their intentions from the outset. Secondly, their contributions. Who's responsible for doing what, from financial to equipment to episode editing, labor, marketing, promoting, all those kinds of things. It's kind of about knowing who's bringing the bricks and who's swinging the hammer if you're building that house. Also, revenue sharing. How are the profits going to be divided? It is really crucial that this is agreed upon before the money starts coming in so you don't end up with those big disputes. And then dissolution terms. What happens if the podcast ends or somebody wants out? Or the rest of the someones want to let someone else out? Okay, well, this is where you're planning to put the exit doors into this shared house that you're building. And then the decision making. How are they going to be made? And how are disputes going to be resolved? This will ensure everyone knows how the meetings are going to be run, how decisions will be made, what to do if there's a disagreement, and maybe where to look outside for some extra input if that kind of thing comes up. So imagine you've got a podcast. This time it's about outdoor adventures. You got three enthusiasts. If they had a podcast prenup stating that decisions need a 2/3 majority, well, that would prevent any one of the co-hosts from making unilateral decisions that could affect the direction and the spirit of the podcast. So you can see it's pretty straightforward. So how do you get a podcast prenup in the first place? How do you get started? Well, head on over to podcastprenup.com, where I've got a free planning guide for your podcast prenup. This conversation guide will help you and your co-host to have that conversation and cover all the essential basis. And think of it as gathering all the materials before you start assembling this thing. Next, I recommend consulting with a lawyer who understands the unique needs of podcasters. Someone like me who can help you tailor your prenup to fit your show's specific circumstances and situation. Now, bringing a lawyer into the mix might seem like a big step, but consider the lawyer like the skilled architect who ensures that the podcast house isn't going to fall down at the first sign of trouble. We're here to make sure every clause in your contract supports and protects your intention and your purposes and your joint creation. So don't wait until you're facing a dispute to think about these things. Be proactive. Go on over to Podcast Prenup now and get that free Podcast Prenup planning guide. Protect your show, your finances, and your friendships by being proactive and prepared. And that's it for this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this episode helpful, and if so, please share it with fellow podcasters. Hit that subscribe button, share it on social media, and so on. And until next time, keep it legal, keep it professional, and keep it legit. Bye for now.